Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Todd Metcalf. Last night, President Biden delivered his annual State of the Union message to a joint session of Congress. Joining us to share their insights on the president's speech are Chairman Dave Camp and Janice Mays. Chairman Camp, Janice, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So Chairman Camp, let's start with you. What are your key takeaways from last night's speech?
Well, I'd say this speech was really an attempt by President Biden to kind of reset his campaign and really deliver to his base the messages that he would be delivering in the campaign. And there was quite a bit of tax policy in this speech, and I think that really frames the debate for the end of 2025 when much of the TCJA expires. He spent time on mentioning that corporations and the wealthy need to pay their fair share. He mentioned a higher corporate rate, a higher rate on minimum tax for corporations and the wealthy. So I think that he really put down a marker for where he's going to be in the next administration on this. And also these are going to be campaign themes with regard to tax that we'll hear over and over again.
So Janice, as Chairman Camp mentioned, there was a lot of tax in the speech last night, but the president also talked about a broad menu of other policy priorities. Well, let's hear a little bit about some of the other themes that he hit. We'll turn to tax in a second.
It was an energetic speech about a lot of broad themes. You're absolutely correct. First, he began and he talked several times throughout the speech about protecting democracy at home and abroad and protecting the border. He tried to go on the offensive in both those cases. He talked about restoring reproductive rights after the Roe v. Wade decision. He talked about continuing to improve health care with some new ideas on cancer and things, and expanding the housing stock within the country. And he spent a lot of time on improving the economy. And as Chairman Camp said, he talked about fairness. He talked about building yet more jobs in manufacturing and other areas, lowering costs for housing, education, health care, and putting restrictions on business charges for people to keep their costs down. So he went after junk fees and what he called shrinkflation, where you get less product for the same price. And then with taxes, he did talk again about big corporations and the wealthy, helping make it fair by putting more taxes on them.
So more specifically on tax, what more specifically did he lay out as his tax priorities in the second term?
Well, he did double down on things he had proposed before and was unsuccessful in achieving even when the Democrats controlled the House and the Senate. But it will be a new Congress going forward after this election, and we'll see what is possible in that context. But in the corporate area, he proposed to take the domestic corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%, a proposal we've seen before. The domestic corporate alternative minimum tax, the CAMT, from 15% to 21%, and that international minimum tax from 15% to 21%. So really talking about corporations paying more than firemen and other working middle class individuals. And then he talked about not deducting more than $1 million for any employee's salary. And he talked about taking that stock buyback tax from 1% to 4%, quadrupling it. And then corporate jets, very focused on something that only the wealthy have the advantage of, making sure that those are taxed a little more heavily in individuals. He kept at his 25% tax on people making more than 100 million, these billionaires he talked about, and expanding again his proposal, that Medicare tax, that net investment income tax, broadening that and making that bigger. And then he talked a little bit about people at lower income levels, going back to that broader child tax credit, expanding the earned income tax credit for childless workers, and a housing tax credit for the purchase of some housing.
So, Chairman Camp, President Biden laid out a very broad agenda, an agenda that concerns all taxpayers, some more positively than others, I suppose. But what challenges do you see to this president accomplishing these policy objectives in a second term?
Yes, in a second term, I think it really will depend on the makeup of the Congress. I mean, obviously, as Janice pointed out, that some of these items weren't even supported when Democrats had full control, but there will be different personalities in the Congress next time. I think if it is divided government, I think it will be very difficult to see much of the tax increases enacted. However, though, given the state of the debt and deficit, how tax policy and the debt intertwine, I think in the next administration will be interesting to see. But at least we know where the president is coming from at this point. These are the things he will try to achieve in a second administration. And much of it will depend on whether there's divided government or not. And I think that makes these things difficult, even in one-party control, as we saw before. I think some of these things will be challenging. There is really a case to be made that do higher taxes really bring prosperity, or do they actually create economic growth? And that debate is something that has gone on for some time between Democrats and Republicans in the Congress. There's really no consensus on that between the parties. But I think the challenges are there in terms of trying to implement those items, because they've been on the table for a while and not all of them have made it over the finish line.
That's absolutely true. Thank you, Chairman Camp. Thank you, Janice, for that very thoughtful encapsulation of what was a very long and detailed speech last night. And for our viewers, there are links to this week's Monday Briefing and Election Watch in the description of this episode. Thank you for spending this time with us, and take care.